Welcome to Reverend Mike. Come in, come in. Just hanging out here in the pastor's study, just taking some downtime. And usually what I do, existentialist ministry, can be somewhat intensive, dealing with the world as it is and trying to understand the world and trying to find a path forward in the world. It requires a lot of action. I think that's a joke. So a lot of times what I do, and you can see here, I got books, paper. Please grab a seat. And I've got, let's see, coffee, tea. There's some water over there. Got a few soft drinks. Just please make yourself at home. No, you're not intruding at all. I just come back here and I got an internet connection, and I like to take some topics and just follow them and pursue them wherever they lead. It's something I used to do. I grew up at a time before the internet, and sometimes my friends and I would topic jump. I don't remember what we called it. I don't think we called it that, but we would take an idea and then we would springboard off of that and go from idea to idea to idea. And depending on how old we were, the ideas, I suppose they might have been about comic books or things like that, or just about general topics in the world. But I've been looking at systems before computers a lot, and I brought something I think you might be interested. We were talking about railroads last time and timetable and train order operations, and I've got this. You can see it's a little red book, and it's printed. Let's see how many pages this is. 165 pages, plus the blank end pages. And it says on the cover here, New York Central System, Rules of the Operating Department, effective October 28, 1956. There's no writing on the spine. I believe this is called Perfect Bound. It's like a book you'd get from the library, but what are the dimensions? It's really small. Usually have a measuring tape handy. It's about 4 1/4 inches wide by 6 1/4 inches long. So it really is a pocketbook, and I believe these had to be carried at all times by employees. They were responsible for knowing everything in it, at least in general, and they always had to have a copy of the rules. My grandfather was an employee of this railroad. This isn't his book. I bought this off the internet. It was owned by either a GE. I can't tell. It's like an older kind of cursive. A GE or an HE Davidson, employed as switchman, and then it says NKP. I'm guessing NKP might be a division or something like that. This is number, and this is stamped and issued February 7th, 1958, number A63913. It also says this book is the property of New York Central System and is loaned to. So I got this off of eBay. I hope I didn't get it through nefarious means. There are a lot of these things floating around. I've seen them at railroad shows, model railroad shows, and things like that. But I wanted to show this to you because we were talking about timetable and train order operations and the whole idea of systems before computers, human systems before computers were in place. For the railroad, it really came down to this. This is a foundation document. In order to accomplish things on the railroad that we were talking about, like how do you move multiple trains, multiple locomotives over just a few tracks? You have to have these rules and agreements in place. You have to have shared definitions and so forth. It's not enough to say, oh, I still have a couple of train orders here. This is how they were written out. These are These are from a different railroad, the Central Railroad Company of New Jersey. And here's one from April 5th, 1974. This is train order number 301. It's a Form 31. It's on a yellow sheet. And a Form 31 was different from a Form 19 in that the engineer, conductor, the crew had to stop and actually sign for the order. The Form 19, that could just be picked up on the fly. The crew didn't even need to leave the train. They could just hook it up into the cab using one of those hooks, maybe the same kind that they used to pick up mail bags. There's some nice videos about that. But this particular one, train order number 301, reads, and this is all handwritten on a form. It says, number 1120 engine PC 4258 has right over opposing trains on, and I can't quite make this out, ZCO, 2202, track, Wall to Neptune. Do not exceed a speed of 5 miles per hour on number 2 track over water rails, shark, interlocking something by number 302. Number 302, I'm guessing that's the next train order is going to be issued. So I can't quite make this out. It is somebody's handwriting, but this kind of thing, it begs a lot of questions. And those questions can be answered if we have shared definitions. I remember talking with an industry expert in a completely different industry, and he made the point to this professional classes, and it was a seminar, one-day seminar, something like that. He started talking about how to do the thing in the industry we were in, and he made the point that we have to have a shared vocabulary. That's the word he used, vocabulary. And a lot of industries have this. I think probably most of them. It doesn't matter where you work, you're going to have a lingo or things that outsiders are not necessarily going to understand. I used to mention this before. I used to work in a place where I was sending pages to a printer, and the person on the other end would call at the end of a shift, and he'd say, "You're good to go," which meant I was literally good to go and pack up the computer and leave for the day. But what he was really conveying with just those few words was, we have everything we need. Everything's confirmed. There are no errors, no blowouts, anything like that. Good to go. And there are a lot of other industries too, like air traffic control. That's tends to be a very crisp language between pilots and air traffic control. And there's a shorthand that's used. It's fascinating to me. So number 1120 engine PC 4258 has right over opposing trains. So what does right mean? We could probably guess at that. Opposing trains. What are opposing trains? Are probably trains traveling in the opposite direction. Kind of straightforward, but there's still all these questions. Neptune. What's Neptune? Probably a station. And this book I bought, I can read a little bit of it here. It starts on page 9. General rules. A. Employees whose duties are prescribed by these rules must provide themselves with a copy. Employees whose duties are in any way affected by the timetable must have a copy of the current timetable with them while on duty. So now we're really getting into requirements, and the way I read this is they have to have a copy of this book, and they also have to carry the timetable. And I remember reading that before. I never got to talk with my grandfather. He died before I was born, but he would have been carrying around a timetable with him at all times. So any employee could consult the timetable. And then there are more rules. A1, employees while on duty connected with the trains of any division of the road are under the authority and must conform to the orders of the superintendent of that division. So I wonder here if what this rule book is doing, and it's only the third sentence, is establishing there is such a thing as a rule book, which we're looking at now. There is such a thing as a timetable, that the timetables are updated, that you have to have a current copy. And then with this line, under the authority and must conform to the orders of the superintendent. So I think that's the overlay on top of the rule book and the timetable, that the superintendent, according to this, and I imagine the superintendent's delegates, say dispatchers, can issue orders that then supersede, say, the timetable, which would go back to around 1851 when Charles Minot of the Erie Railroad issued an order, as the general superintendent issued an order and said, basically ignore the timetable, train that has superiority over the train he was on. I think that was up at Goshen, New York. He ordered that train to stay in place for safety. And then he ordered his train to proceed. So he superseded the timetable. So they did all this, if I'm reading this correctly, they did all this in just 3 sentences. They've established the lines of authority. And there's more here. There's a lot more here. It starts on page 13 with definitions. So now we really have that shared vocabulary that industry expert was telling my group years and years ago. Definitions: blocks. Block, a length of track of defined limits, the use of which by trains and engines is governed by block signals. Absolute block, a block which may be occupied by but one train or engine at a time. Permissive block, a block which may be occupied by 2 or more trains or engines at the same time. Clear block, a block not occupied. And there are a bunch more. Division, that portion of a railroad assigned to the supervision of a superintendent. Supervision, a portion of a division, subdivision, a portion of a division designated by timetable. Signals, speeds, it gets into all of this. Switches, talking in the last episode about the trolley problem and being next to a lever that effectively is a railroad switch. Switches, electrically locked switch, a hand-operated switch equipped with an electrically controlled device. It doesn't really define a switch. Spring switch, a switch equipped with a spring mechanism. So the definitions of switches, it doesn't say what a switch is. It just describes 2 switches. And it says they're switches. And then it talks about what kind they are. Go back here. Let's take a look at the table of contents. They call it an index. So definitions, forms of blanks, forms of train orders, general notice, general rules, general signal information, interlocking rules, operating rules. Let me skip ahead a bit. There are a lot of illustrations back here. I'm on, let's see, page 100, Rule 293. And there's a picture. It's printed. It's all printed in color. This is more black and white one, but it looks like a flag, a circular flag. And I'm guessing it's not a flag. It's probably like a metal sign, but the sign has a big white S on it. And figure 209 says indication be governed by signal indication and take or leave sighting and next switch. Name, take, parentheses, or leave, parentheses, sighting. So that's what that is. And then there are all of these lanterns. There's a bit of semaphore here. There's a crossbar, and it's diagonal on this one, where there's a lantern on top of a pole, and then there's a diagonal crossbar. It's pointing to the right. And this diagram, as figure 217, specifies that the lantern is lunar white And the label on this is line for straight track or lead. And then it gets into all of these others, manual block system rules. Yeah, it's, here we go, 78, page 78, forms of blanks. There's a form 19, and it's an example of what the form looks like when it's not filled out. There's a clearance form on page 79, page 80, that's clearance form B, page 81, register check form C. And this particular form, it starts out with the name of railroad, and then it says register check form C. It's got places to fill in. Here's the date, 19. I remember that. All of the forms would say 19 blank blank, which worked pretty well for a while. And then it didn't. Engine man, engine number, train number at blank M. The following trains due which are superior have arrived or left. And then there are two columns, one for trains, one for signals, and then at the bottom is conductor. I was looking into this further, and I think you might, that's a really interesting book. If you come across a copy or can find one and are interested in that, I can highly recommend it. I don't know what to say about this book as property of, but a lot of these things have made their way probably into estates and so forth. Things have changed. Train orders just aren't, I don't think they're used at all anymore. But they were all the rage back in the mid to late 1800s and on into the 1900s until the automatic systems took over. But this is really, there was something interesting in those blank forms. It had at the top of the form, name of the railroad. That's literally what it said, name of the railroad. But the whole book is issued by the New York Central, and they didn't say New York Central Railroad. They just said name of railroad. And there's another book I got online. I brought it here. This is an even thicker book. It's a little bit larger. Type's a little bit larger too. This goes on for 459 pages. And to talk about foundation documents for coming up with a system, like to move trains from one place to the other. You have to have rules for it. You have to have definitions. Everybody needs to understand certain things. And then you can overlay onto that a timetable and say, this is when the trains are going to move. And then you can overlay on that starting with the fundamental notion that a superintendent can issue orders that supersede everything else. You can have train orders. And then with those things in place, you can start to move these massive trains around all over the country. And I found an even more foundational document that's alluded to by that form that says name of railroad. Fill that out. And it's a book called it's called Rights of Trains by Peter Josserand. And this went through several printings. This is a 5th edition, and I think this itself must be a reprint. It's a very new book. But 5th printing, and the copyright was 1904, 1925, 1945, 1951, 1957. So this is right about the time of the New York Central Rule Book. This was a year later. Peter Josserand, it says here on the title page, was Night Chief Dispatcher, Western Pacific Railroad, Sacramento, California. Rules Consultant, Brotherhood of Locomotive Firemen and Engine Men. And this is like a gold mine of those foundational rules and definitions. A foreword, it says, more than 100 years have elapsed since American railroads first began operation of more than one engine on a given stretch of track. With the coming of the second engine, provisions had to be made to prevent opposing movements from colliding. And it was at this early time that the first operating rules came into existence. These rules were at first comparatively simple, but as traffic increased, they became progressively more complicated. It goes on a bit. In the late 1880s, the industry became conscious of the need for pooling their hard-won knowledge and experience to produce the best possible set of operating rules to be made available to all roads. Much of this knowledge had arisen out of hazard, which had resulted from inadequate rules. In 1889, the General Time Convention adopted the first standard code, designated as Uniform Train Rules and Rules for the Movement of Trains by Telegraphic Orders. It represented the accumulated knowledge of the best operating department minds in the industry. Out of the General Time Convention developed the Association of American Railroads. This first effort was not enough. Some of the rules were not airtight. There developed hazards which necessitated further revision. Conditions on the railroad changed, the density of traffic increased. It mentions telephones here, etc., etc., etc. In this 5th edition, it has been my aim to set forth clearly the basic principles underlying the rules and to show how the rules of various roads differ from the standard code and from each other. The beginner should obtain a broad perspective of the rules so as to develop ability to apply his knowledge to the rules of his individual road in solving such problems as may arise in his work. Once the basic principles are understood, it is not difficult to apply them to any given set of rules. And it goes on quite a bit. Peter Jocelyn, Sacramento, California, September 1957. I'll leave with just a little bit of chapter 1. Oh, no, page 2. So this is moving past the preamble. Chapter 1, the Standard Code of Operating Rules, Block Signal Rules, and Interlocking Rules adopted March 1949. So it gets into that, but then this is really interesting. Page 2, General Rules. A. Employees whose duties are prescribed by these rules must provide themselves with a copy. Employees whose duties are in any way affected by the timetable must have a copy of the current timetable with them while on duty. B. Employees must be conversant with and obey the rules and special instructions. If in doubt as to their meaning, they must apply to proper authority for an explanation. This starts out very similar to the New York Central Rule Book. And I'm looking through a lot of these other things. This really must have been the industry standard. It goes into definitions. Division, that portion of a railroad assigned to the supervision of a, and then there's some periods there. It's like an extended ellipses, and then it says in parentheses, usually superintendent. Fixed signal, I signal a fixed location. I'll bet there's switches in here too. Oh, so this is wonderful. Well, I could spend probably several days with this. It's quite a book. I think, yep, here are some forms as well. Industry standard. So this is a foundation document to a foundation document. Wow. How do we get onto that topic? Let's end it there. Music is Frost Waltz, Kevin MacLeod, Incompetech.com. Licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0. http creativecommons.org/licenses/by/3.0/ Until next time.